This episode of Cape Ann Today is brought to you by J&L Welding.
Good afternoon, State Senator Bruce Tarr. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Heather. I'm doing great. And how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
We have a lot to talk about, though.
We sure do. And it's great to see that sunlight streaming through the windows behind you, the Cape Ann sunlight. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day. It's windy, but it's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
So things are going to open up there at the State House. You're not at the State House now, I can tell, but you go there all the time and you will have visitors again, right?
Well, I'm thrilled that the State House is reopening. And frankly, I wish that it happened a lot sooner than it is happening, but there are a number of different reasons that that wasn't the case. But the important thing is now the doors are going to open. The public is welcome back into the People's Building. There are some requirements, Heather, in terms of having to be vaccinated and having to wear a mask. You can also show a test, a recent negative test for COVID-19. So with those health restrictions, folks can come back to the State House. And I have to tell you, it's been an odyssey over these past, again, more than 700 days for me, because I am generally at the State House most days, and I have a skeleton staff there as well. But it's been a very strange experience not to have such a public building be filled with people transacting various kinds of state business. So it's an exciting time. I think it's a sign that we are hopefully moving past the most intense period of COVID-19. Certainly it's not over yet, but it's a sign of progress that the State House is going to be back open.
But people can still watch over remote
Absolutely.
feeds, right? So, and that's great.
It's an important question, and it's something that I've always fought hard to make sure could happen, regardless of the pandemic or not, is that folks be able to watch our formal sessions. They're live streamed on our website, as well as our informal sessions. And so that's going to continue. And then hearings are important because prior to the pandemic, hearings were not available for participation through remote means. And that's something that we're working on right now to try to make sure that folks still can have access to remote participation in the event that they can't get to the State House, which oftentimes takes a significant amount of time, and logistical concerns in terms of finding parking and other kinds of things are there. So we're working to make sure that we can learn from having made that remote participation available and continue to make it available so people can participate fully in the operations of their state government.
Well, I often see on your Facebook page some of these live feeds, but where can people go to find links if they're not on Facebook?
So the website for the state legislature is malegislature.gov. And if you go there, you'll see that there's a calendar, and the calendar lists the sessions. And all you have to do is click on them and you can watch the live stream.
All right, great. Well, the Senate just passed a pharmaceutical bill or pharmacy bill. Tell us what that's all about.
We did, and the bill is known as the PACT Act, which stands for Pharmaceutical Access, Cost, and Transparency. And the idea is really to address one of the ever-rising costs in healthcare, and that is pharmaceuticals. And this bill seeks to get at that issue in a number of different ways. One of the most significant ways is to look at the role that pharmacy benefit managers are playing in the delivery of prescription drugs in the Commonwealth. And for those that might not be aware of them, pharmacy benefit managers are contracted, usually by insurers, to be able to control the cost of prescription drugs. And they manage the formulary. They manage what drugs are available through a particular payer and what you might be able to get, and some of the terms and conditions by which you can get those drugs. And yet those groups right now, those pharmacy benefit managers, are not licensed, and they're not subject to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of oversight, even though they play a significant role in our daily lives in terms of what we're paying for copays and deductibles and what drugs are available. So one of the most significant things about the PAC Act is to bring them within the embrace of oversight, to require licensure, to require periodic audits. An amendment that I offered successfully to the bill would require those audits to be made public in terms of posting on the internet. So that's one piece of the bill. Another piece is to try to cap co-pays and deductibles for insulin, because as important and as basic as insulin is, and it's been around for a long time, we have seen cost spikes that have been very detrimental to the people who depend on it every day. And so the bill sets some caps on the charge for insulin. In addition to that, it sets up a trust fund to be able to help folks with some of the highest cost drugs. And that is a work in progress. An amendment that I offered would require that trust fund to be structured in such a way that we maximize federal reimbursement for its expenditures, because if we do it in conjunction with the state's Medicaid program, the likelihood is that we can get significant federal reimbursement for doing this, this act of making funding available, which is extremely important for a lot of folks who depend on drugs that can be very, very costly. There's a lot of other reporting in the bill and analysis in terms of the cost of prescription drugs. So it's an important bill. It passed the Senate. There was only one vote in dissent, so it was a 39-1 vote, and now it's over in the House for their consideration.
And what does it look like in the House? What do you think?
Well, it's unclear. I think certainly the members of the House understand the issue and the importance of the issue of cost of drugs. The House has a lot of things on its agenda, so I think it's a question of trying to fit this consideration of this particular bill into the many things the House is already working on. But I'm very optimistic. I hope this bill will get serious consideration by the House and that it will get approved. And it's not likely to get approved in exactly the same way that the Senate passed it. We may have to go to a conference committee and reconcile two versions of the bill. I think that's fine. But I think it's important that we do try to move forward, because this is such an important factor in our healthcare system. And if we can find ways that make sense, that don't harm economically and in terms of the viability of the folks that produce these drugs, because they're very important to the Massachusetts economy as well, perhaps more than most states. If we can find that balance, and that's what the Senate bill seeks to do, it will make a huge difference in people's lives. So my hope is the House will take it up and take it up in time so that we can work through whatever our differences might be.
Well, zoning seems to be on everybody's mind these days. There was a law passed, a state law passed last year that required multifamily zoning areas around MBTA stations, right? So
It was. Go ahead.
You tell me, you describe it.
So it was a component of an economic development bill. And part of that bill was to recognize the need for housing as part of trying to grow our economy and maintain the economic strength that we already have. I don't think anyone would argue that Massachusetts doesn't have a shortage of housing. And so we need to find ways to try to boost production. This particular element of that bill suggested that if you are serviced by the MBTA, which are a great many communities in Eastern Massachusetts, then you have to create a zoning overlay, a specific area, and it has to be in close proximity to the MBTA, and it has to allow for increased density, 15 units per acre, and it must allow multifamily housing by right. Now, that doesn't mean that the housing would escape all scrutiny, but it means that you wouldn't need a variance to get that type of housing. And significantly, the bill itself, the provisions of the law are very basic. They're essentially what I just described. But the law has to be implemented, and it's implemented through regulation. And the regulations that are out right now as a proposal are causing a lot of concern. And we're hearing from lots of folks about that. And so, for instance, there's concern about just how close the housing has to be to the transportation facility. It may not be possible in some communities. Other communities are suggesting that if they try to rezone to create this kind of housing, that it might not be able to be serviced by water and sewer utilities and things that are important to be able to construct housing. There's a lot of concern that the regulations may be a little bit too much of a one-size-fits-all situation, and maybe there needs to be some flexibility. one of the important things, Heather, about the requirement that's in statute and that's then translated through the regulations is that neither of them require the production of housing. They require the zoning to change to allow the production of housing. And in my mind, a significant question exists as to whether, if we change the zoning, whether there will be developers that would be interested in building this type of housing in a particular area. So while I certainly understand the motivation here, I think this one deserves careful scrutiny, and I think it's something we need to look at in terms of the regulations and whether they will work for every community, keeping in mind that we do need to increase our production of affordable housing stock.
Can you just explain a little bit more what you mean by the regulations will basically monitor the situation?
The Department of Housing and Community Development is charged with developing the regulations to implement the law.
Okay.
And so right now they've put forward a set of regulations, and it's very important to remember that those regulations are open to public comment. And the public comment period, I believe, ends on March 14th. And if folks want more information about that, they can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to give them all the information they need to make public comment. But the regulations are the way that the law is carried out. So the law starts in a more generic way. And the regulations seek to refine that in the law's applicability to every community in the Commonwealth that's affected by this. And I would point out that the penalty, if a community doesn't comply with this, is to be excluded from eligibility for some state funding programs, such as Mass Works and one-stop grants and other kinds of things. So it isn't an absolute requirement in the sense that a community could be sued and the state could seek some injunctive relief or some equitable remedy to force it to enact these regulations. The consequences, if you don't have them, then you aren't eligible for some fairly important state funding programs. But there's a long way to go on this issue, and I wouldn't be surprised, not only if we see a lot of public comment and a lot of suggestions for changing the regulations, I also wouldn't be surprised if we see proposals to alter the law itself based on all the discussion that's happening around the state.
These towns are so, it's not like the Midwest where you have straight roads, and it's going to be complicated, particularly around train stations where they're usually very old communities. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I would just say you're right. And a lot of the neighborhoods near train stations are already built out. Right. So changing the law may not create more units at all, because many of the units that are in the zone may already comply, because they may already be multifamily and there may already be high densities in those areas. So we've got a long way to go on this issue.
I would like to talk to you about yet another conversation around the right whales. All right, Congressman Seth Moulton has proposed or introduced a bill called the Right Whale Coexistence Act. What do you feel? How do you think about that? Because you've been involved in this a lot. Yeah.
I welcome the congressman's proposal, and I believe he's also filed it. His co-sponsor is Cory Booker, and they are working to try to make sure that resources are available to do the kind of research we need so that we can still have a commercial fishing industry and at the same time be able to protect the right whale and hopefully increase the spawning stock of right whales so that we have more of them. And so, what this bill seeks to do is something that I think is very important, and that is to try to protect two things that are important to all of us, the endangered species in terms of the right whale and the commercial fishing industry, which is very important to us on Cape Ann. And being able to put more resources on the table to research fishing gear that is less likely to harm a right whale or fishing practices is very important. And so I welcome the bill, and hopefully we would get some federal dollars if the bill is successful to complement some of the money that we're spending as state government. You may recall that we've discussed in the past, I amended the budget, the state budget for this year, to be able to provide resources for the environmental police to monitor the right whales so that we can prevent interactions with vessels, because if the environmental police know they're there and they can ward off potential threats, that's going to be important. We've also been putting money into gear research at the state level. and trying to make sure, again, that we have fishing gear that is the least likely possible to influence or entangle a right whale. So we've been working on this at the state level, and it would be wonderful if the federal government would also engage in the very important project. And my only caution is we just need to make sure that we understand the importance of both goals of protecting and increasing the stock of right whales, but also making sure that we allow our commercial fishing communities and families to continue to make a living and provide a food resource for the country.
Mm. And I think in one of our conversations in the past, we had talked about this high-tech gear being, created, but it also being costly. So, could some of these small boats afford this super high-tech stuff? And it sounds as if that might be built into the Moulton and Booker bill.
I think it certainly is one of the things that the bill looks at and contemplates. But again, that's an issue. If we develop gear that's unaffordable to the folks that engage in the lobster fishery, for instance, then we really haven't necessarily accomplished our goal, because we've got something that in theory makes sense. But if you can't deploy it, then it's not going to help. So we need to think about that, and cost effectiveness needs to be a concern in all of the research that gets done on this subject.
Well, my very, very last question is, have you seen CODA?
I have not.
Oh, no.
I have talked to so many folks that have had such great things to say about it, but I haven't yet. Hopefully soon.
All right, I hope so.
And thanks for the chance to talk. Always great to be able to share some thoughts about what's going on Beacon Hill, and only able to do that because of 1623 Studios making this opportunity available. So thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.